Chapter 36. Priya. Priya and Sima traveled together in the juddering chariot along the edge of the valley, which roiled and glimmered in the rising sunlight. Priya made a point of ignoring low Prince Ashutosh, who was riding ahead alongside Prince Rao. It was Rao who went to the village by the riverside and paid a woman to show them the way to the crossing. As she guided them, she looked back nervously every few footsteps. Priya couldn't blame her. The crossing led them to what was not quite a ford, not shallow enough to be easily passable by horse or foot, but was a curve in the river where the water was broken, slowed, and softened by small islets emerging from the waves like a vertebrae of a great spine. There were boats on the shore, light contraptions with oars, but properly made, with enough space and strength to carry across a horse at a time, or a handful of men, or some of their heavier weaponry if they balanced it with care. Priya, glad to be free of the chariot, moved to stand at the edge of the water. It was dark even here, frothing as it rocked against the bank. Sima came to stand beside her, knocking her shoulder lightly against Priya's. "The owl head over there looks like he's going to cause trouble again," she muttered. The owl head in question was Ashutosh, striding over to Rao's side. "If one of us moves closer, we should be able to hear them," said Sima. "Are you curious?" "Of course I am," said Sima. "Aren't you?" Of course she was. But Priya had to bite back a laugh at the thought of her and Sima inconspicuously shuffling toward the two men. Their days of being invisible were long gone, unfortunately. "Let's just approach them," Priya said. "I need to speak to the good Lord Prince anyway." "Alor is known for its rivers," Rao was saying with barely feigned patience. Ashutosh snorted. "Forgive me, Prince Rao," he said in the kind of voice that suggested he was about to say something that might in fact be unforgivable, but didn't much care. "You're barely familiar with Alor anymore, never mind its rivers. Raised in the imperial mahal as you were, who can blame you? Whereas my estates are surrounded by lakes. My men are trained for this. We will go first and secure the opposite bank. Your men will follow." "And what does Lord Narayan think of this plan?" Rao asked. "Narayan does not outrank me," Ashutosh said sharply. "He's the Empress's Sakitan general," Priya said. She couldn't help but enjoy the glare Ashutosh turned on her even as he bowed his head stiffly in a gesture of respect, which she returned with a smile. "I'm sure he'd like to help." "Shall I call him here, my lords?" Sima chirped. "That would be helpful. Thank you," Rao said with a nod, and Sima turned and left. "Lo Prince," he went on, once again meeting Ashutosh's gaze. "If you are willing to take the risk of forging ahead before my men, we are grateful." "It's no risk," Ashutosh said. "My men are well trained, and you, elder," he said, turning his attention abruptly on Priya, "what will you be contributing to our efforts?" "I am here under Prince Rao's protection," Priya said, knowing he'd interpret that as nothing. "Are your men recovering well, my lord?" Ashutosh's throat worked. "Yes," he bit out. "They'll be joining me in the crossing." "I am glad to hear it." He gave her one more nod, said gruffly, "Prince Rao." Then he stalked off. Rao was watching her. Priya met his eyes, feeling oddly defiant. "Prince Rao," she said, "is something amiss?" He shook his head slowly. "You're friends with Malini," he said, voice lowered. "Friends?" Was there special emphasis on that word? She wasn't sure, but she nodded. "Of a kind." He hummed in acknowledgement. "You're not very like her," he said. "That's all. You're very forthright." "Oh, I am like her," thought Priya, even as she said nothing, even as she stared at the opposite bank, at the spindles of distant trees and the lush fronds dipping into the eddying water. "I just wear my anger on the outside." The water was definitely less turbulent here. One of Ashutosh's men had dived in and confirmed that there was no hidden undertow to concern them. One small islet, barely large enough for a handful of men but covered with vine-draped trees, acted as a natural resting point and a place where they could conceal themselves. If they moved slowly, with care, they'd be able to cross more or less invisibly. Priya stood by the water's edge for a long moment, feeling the humming song of the green around her, the weight and motion of the water against the riverbed, and the things that grew from it. She began to reach out subtly to reshape the world around them. But the water here didn't have the stillness of the Ahiranya marshland, or the strange magic of the deathless waters. It was powerful, full of energy and its own will, and trying to shift it made her head pound. Priya left Rao with Narayan, who had arrived with a throng of archers. They waited, watchful, as Ashutosh and his men stripped off the weightiest parts of their armor, tying the metal into oilskin sacking. They waded into the water until they were chest deep, dragging the boats full of supplies in deeper after themselves. Priya was reluctantly impressed to see that Ashutosh was as willing to enter the water as any of his men. As they moved further into the current, Priya crouched by the edge of the water. She let her breathing go slow and deep, not deep enough to let her slip into the Sangam, but far enough for her to stretch her limbs of her magic. It took her an embarrassing long time for her power to drift across, to feel the weft of living things growing from the silt of the riverbed and the tangled fringe of plants breathing on the shoreline, to feel what was waiting on the opposite bank. Oh, shit. She jerked up and stumbled over nothing, over her own feet. Sima, she said, gripped Sima's arm. You need to get back. Find somewhere to hide. Why? Sima's eyes were dark with concern. Priya, what's happened? There are men waiting, she managed. She forced herself to let go of Sima, turned. Hide, please. Priya, wait! But Priya couldn't wait. She ran to Rao and Narayan, forcing her way through the throng of men surrounding them. There are enemies waiting to ambush on the opposite bank. Rao gaped at her. What? There are... I heard you, Rao said. Show me. She swung an arm widely out, and Rao crouched a little, following the line of her finger. Behind him, Narayan was murmuring to the men, directing them to draw their arrows, to ready their shields, and line the bank, and signal low Prince Ashutosh if they could, just in case. Just in case. I see nothing, said Rao. And perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps there was nothing visible there to the naked mortal eye. But Priya could feel the soft grass crushed beneath the boots, the shift of their feet just slightly beyond the reach of their strength. Look again, she said. This time she watched him. She saw the moment his eyes widened. His expression went suddenly tight. Priya didn't have to know him particularly well to read that look as panic. Signal them back, he bit out. Narayan, signal Prince Ashutosh. He's too far already, Narayan said. He was dragging off his armor, clumsy with panic. I will follow him. Tell him, don't be foolish, Priya said, shocked to hear her own voice, to feel her lips move. Your men need you here. Light a torch. Set a fire. Draw their attention. Narayan shook his head. Rao said, we can't risk drawing attention from the enemies across the water if we haven't yet. But you have, Priya said. Distant thud of feet. Dozens. Hundreds. They were waiting. Rao. Prince Rao. You have. Get them back here now. But it was too late. Priya was still speaking, mouth moving, when she raised her head and saw the arrows flying through the sky. A hush. The arrows met the water with a crash. She felt Rao grip her roughly by the arm, forcing her behind him as if he could protect her, as if she needed protecting. And shit, where was Sima? She told Sima to hide, but had she? Had she got far enough away? In the water, she saw the figures of men and horses sink through a haze of arrows and blood, their screams cut short. There was another volley of arrows, so thick the air was black with them. The water churned, frothy with blood. Around her, the Alorans and Saketans who grabbed shields on Narayan's orders raised them to the sky. She heard a scream. She turned and saw that it was Narayan with an arrow through his thigh. She took Rao's arm and pulled him down. Stay low, she said. You know this. You must stop shielding me. Priya! Sima's voice. Sima dropped to her knees beside them and dropped a heavy shield with a clang. Rao muttered something that might have been a curse or might have been thanks, and dragged it up in front of the three of them. He braced it with his arm, and Sima did the same, and the two of them holding it up between them. Priya looked around as she heard a bitten-off noise of pain. An Aloran and a Saketan's shoulder were shielding Narayan between them, as a third hastily tore at Narayan's trouser leg, seeking out the arrow shaft. With some effort, Priya dragged her gaze away from the blood. I told you to hide, Priya managed. I did, Sima said. She was trembling, but every inch of her coiled with tension. Her arm flexed to keep the shield up, but she met Priya's eyes steadily, and then I came back. There was a thud in the soil behind her, a clang as wood met metal, and Rao and Sima jerked back from the force of the arrow meeting the shield. Malini had told her to use her gifts if the situation became helpless. And this did seem somewhat hopeless, didn't it? Oh, they were in the shit. Prince Rao, Priya said urgently. Next to her, Sima was breathing harshly through bare teeth. Priya pressed a hand to Sima's spine, reminding her she had a spine, reminding her to breathe. Prince Rao, listen to me. I don't wade in after them, yelled one of the Aloran men, so loud that it drew Rao's attention away and made Priya's own voice falter. There were Sakatan soldiers who had still been on the bank, desperately trying to go deeper into the water to reach the bodies of their fellows. One of the Sakatan men, up to his knees in the river, turned back. They're not all dead. We can't leave them. Please. His voice cracked on the last word. Concentrate, Priya told herself harshly. Prince Rao, listen to me. They don't have Mother's fire, Priya said through gritted teeth, and they don't have time for this. Loud enough for Rao to hear her and turn his head again. False fire, magic fire, whatever it was they used at the High Prince's fort. They don't have it here, and they'd be using it against us now. No doubt Chandra is saving the fire for the defense of Hashingar itself, Rao said. He was not panicked any longer. He was flushed with the knife-sharp focus of a body in danger. He clearly doesn't require it to murder us all here. We need to retreat. But we must cross the water if we want any chance of success, Narayan ground out, as one of the soldiers clumsily bandaged up his leg. He tried to bat the man away. Sweat dripped from his hair. If we do not cross, they will turn on the Empress, massacre her forces. We've lost any possibility of surprising them. The gambit's failed, Rao said. It has not failed, Priya said. Her words startled the men, who turned to stare at her with panicked, suspicious eyes. They know we're here. We can't pincer them, but they believe we can't cross, she went on, not allowing her voice to waver or her confidence to falter. And why should it falter? She was about to hand them the key to their own success. She had to believe that. They'll soon turn all their might on the Empress's forces at the fort. They won't expect an enemy at their back. Because they have no enemy at their back, Rouse said. Their enemies lie dead in the water. We lie dead in the water. Ashutosh's men lie dead, Priya corrected, knowing she was brutal in her honesty. Not all of us. She swallowed, soldiered on, despite the sounds of dying and screaming. Draw back, my lords, as if you're retreating. Draw back and let them think this crossing is lost to us. Let those men of Emperor Chandra's turn all their attention on the Empress, and then I'll get you across. Priya, Sima said in a low voice. Her face was gray. Pri, you said you don't know everything I can do, Priya told Rao. But I know what I can do. And your Empress knows, or she wouldn't have summoned me. Let me do what I'm here for. A few warriors obeyed the summons to retreat, making their way back to the shore. Some stayed in the water, bleeding or unconscious or unwilling to leave the wounded or dead behind. Narayan had been carried away by a handful of men, but Priya waited beneath the cover of the shield, Sima and Rao beside her. Rao held the shield steady, expression grim. They're moving their archers forward again, he said quietly. They don't think we're retreating? Priya asked, cursing inwardly. They were dragging back so obviously. If not for Priya, for the foolish plan she was holding fast to, this would be a true retreat. No, they believe it, his voice was tight, but they can afford to leave a force of archers here. I assume their forces are extensive enough at the fort that they think they can defeat the Empress without a handful more arrows. Well, they were wrong. They had to be wrong, or this battle was already lost. Another whistling thud of arrows, a horribly strangled shout from the water. Priya didn't even let herself wince this time. The men were withdrawing behind her in a jangle of armor and hooves and the unsteady creak of chariot wheels. Priya tensed her muscles, rising to a half-crouch. Guide Sima back to safety, she said. Please. Rao gave her a jerky nod. I'd rather go with you, Sima said. She was still shaking, still terrified, but there was a fierceness in her eyes that blazed. Sima, as your advisor, she said deliberately, as your fellow Ahirani, as your friend, I would rather be your protector. I'd rather carry a shield to keep you safe than simply leave you running like a coward. Priya shook her head. I won't risk you here. That isn't your choice to make. I will accompany you also, Rouse said. You have men to lead, Priya said. That is one of my responsibilities, he said. But what I must do is make sure this battle is won, Elder Priya, and I will pay any role required of me. If you must live long enough to do what Nalini requires of you, for this fight to end in our favor, then I'll do all I can to defend you. She focused on the lessons of her childhood. Hollow out weakness. Move forward. She would not allow Sima or Rao to die. Ah, spirits, she could not watch Sima die. So she'd leave her weaknesses, leave them behind. The three of us will be more noticeable to them, she said, gesturing roughly at the opposite bank. Then I'll be on my own, and you'll just get in my way. So, you'll both move back, or I'll make you move back. Understand? Priya was not sure how seriously Rao took that threat, but Sima's mouth thinned. Priya, she said, please. There are going to be other battles, Priya said. Sima, when this ends, when we win, later there are going to be other fights where it's not going to be about what I can do. And I promise when they come, you'll be by my side. They held each other's gazes, one beat. Then Sima exhaled her grip on the shield, loosening. Fine, she said. Fine, Pri. I'm going to hold you to that. When you move, Rao said, we will move. He meant, of course, that he and Sima would wait to see if she made it to the water unharmed before they left her back undefended. She couldn't argue any longer. She turned her focus inward. Slow, deep breaths, guiding her back into her own magic. She kept breathing as she crawled from behind the shield and made her way toward the water. She moved with painful slowness, back bent, ready to throw herself flat to the ground as she tried to be an uninteresting target. She was unarmed, small and dirtied, her hair unraveling. She was nothing and no one of consequence. She reached the water. The arrows didn't find her. She hoped Sima and Rao were leaving now, retreating as she had asked them to, but she couldn't look back. Feet in first. The water was cold, dark with blood. Someone was floating face down near her. Fingertips skimmed the edge of her tunic as it billowed when she waded deeper. She kept on moving. The bodies of Lord Ashutosh's men lay around her, the water barely buoying them up. She could let herself sink now, could reach for her magic, could try. Not yet. Some instinct inside her said. It had a sibilant voice, rich, slithering, coiling through her blood and softening the panicked fire in it. Not quite yet. It was hard to swim, weighted down as she was, shoving rafts and bodies and weaponry out of the way. But she was at the curve of one of the islets now, and there was Lord Ashutosh, turning his head and groaning, blood in his mouth but alive. He would have been submerged if not for one of his men holding him up. The soldier was struggling, his left arm wounded. She swore, half under her breath, and grasped Ashutosh under one arm. He blinked at her. Get out of here, you unnatural witch, he groaned. I am trying to get us all out of here, she hissed, her mind working frantically. First to get Ashutosh and his men from the water, then to deal with the archers. Could she do both? Was that even possible? She looked back at the bank. Too far. It couldn't be done. You, she said to the soldier, Romesh, how badly are you hurt? He shook his head even though she could see the blood matting his sleeve. I won't leave him, he said stubbornly. I'm not asking you to. Do you have the strength to drag him out of the water? Priya asked, gesturing at the island with her chin. I've been trying, he said, but every time we move the damn arrows... As if on cue, there was a whistling noise. Priya ducked her head reflexively. The arrows, thankfully, landed nowhere near them. I see, she managed. Water sloshed coldly over her. Her fingers were pruning, her body trying to shiver for warmth. I'm going to need you to try again. We'll be hit, he said flatly. I need you to do it. I won't die because of your fool orders. Don't try right now, she said hurriedly. In a moment I'm going to do something. When I do, drag him up here and you'll stand a chance." He gave a choked, incredulous laugh. "And what are you going to do? Murder them with your yelling? Stupid woman." Priya ground her teeth together. As insults went, it wasn't her favorite. At least unnatural, which implied she had a certain level of skill and ability, even if she wasn't being lauded for it. "I saved your life, didn't I?" She bared her teeth into a smile, sank deeper in the water, drifting carefully away from him. "I can do anything." The last time she'd been in the water as tainted as this and drawn on her gifts, she'd fallen into a dead faint. But she couldn't think of that. She couldn't allow doubt to creep in. She was in the thick of a massacre now, after all, on the brink of the collapse of all Malini's efforts, Malini's war. And if Priya had a part to play, then the soil and sky, she was going to play it to the hilt. She sucked in a breath, shallower than she would have liked, as Emperor Chandra's Parijatvipa archers in imperial white and gold drew their bows once more. She sank beneath the water as the arrows began to rain, and she let her magic free. The water wasn't in her grip. The silt beneath her feet, mud and fine rocks, and the tiny bones of fish, wasn't rich in plant life either. Curse it. But she could feel enough algae, a faint shimmer of green, the roots of things that grew abundant along the riverbank, and older roots, deeper roots, of trees upon the islet that had once been islands, of trees long dead, their husks still winding beneath the riverbed. She reached and pulled. The magic writhed. It didn't want to obey her. She was asking so much from the soil, the roots, the earth. This was not Ahiranya, where the grain sang and moved with her easily. She was far from home, weaker and weakened, but she was also stubborn, just like she always had been. And she was not going to give up now. She reached deeper and held on harder, throwing all her strength behind that movement of magic calling magic, of her soul reaching out and the green reaching back. Her head ached. It felt as if her skull was splitting, too tight for the powerful unfurling inside it, splitting through her with roots as vicious as teeth, gnawing her flesh open. Stop. Everything screamed in her. Stop. This is too much, too fast, too far. Her strength wasn't enough. The water was too heavy, the green too small, and for all that she'd been healed, that Bhumika had healed her. Priya could feel the echo of the false fire like a scar through her lungs. Breathing around it was hard. It made her magic fracture, twist. She reached harder, grasped the strength of the world around her. "Obey me," she told the green. "I am a temple elder. I am thrice born. I won my power by strength and sacrifice, and you will yield to me. You will. You will." A pause, and a moment when the pain in her skull sharpened to a knife, and the green yielded to it. An animal pinned, throat bared. It was hers now. "Come to me." Everything she could touch with her power breathed and struggled and rose with her call. The earth shuddered, shuddered again. The pain in her skull grew, and through it she forced her eyes open in the murky water and saw through the shifting gloom the shape of the silt breaking in two, of roots rising up, reaching, felt it as the water moved, displaced by the violence of the ground beneath it. She stretched a hand before herself and drew the soil toward her own body. Even through the water, she heard the cries of shock and horror on both sides of the river as the green banks crumbled inward, responding to her. The water was clouding with dirt and blood, growing darker and darker as the water roiled and the earth churned, and the river began to collapse, pulled inexorably by her orbit. The water was hers. The earth was hers. The tightness of her skull shattered, so swift it was like a blow, leaving her gasping, mouth open against the water, her nerves fraying with an agony so fierce it left her numb, and the darkness rushed over her. Silence. She knew she was in the Sangam even before her eyes opened. She was lying on the convergence of waters, lying with her arms spread out and her shadow of a body floating, and gentle hands carding through her hair, gathering the weight of it together, then letting it flow free again. Those had to be her sister's hands. When she tilted her head, water lapping against her forehead, she saw it was indeed Bhumika leaning over her. You use too much of your strength, little sister, Bhumika said. Her voice had a sweetness like sugar cane. She was all warm brown skin, dark hair, smiling mouth. No part of her was made of shadow. In a moment, your flesh will need to breathe, and then you will drown. And Priya, above the shape of Bhumika's face, Priya could see stars blooming. She forced her mouth to open. I don't want to drown, she managed. No one does. That isn't what I'm here for. Bhumika's hands moved from Priya's hair to cup her face. What are you here for? Bhumika asked curiously, keeping Priya's face above water, as if by keeping it above water here, she could do the same in the world of flesh. What are you trying to do? Use my power, Priya said. Win this battle. That's what I want to do. Turn the river against them. In Ahiranya, I could do it. I know I could. You're not in Ahiranya, said Bhumika. You're on land that hasn't known the touch of Yaksa in far too long. And you're still weakened, Priya. You've made an error. Fond, chiding words, and yet, Bhumika, Priya said, aren't you angry with me? Sad that I'll die? She looked up not at the stars this time, but into Bhumika's eyes. You don't seem like yourself. I can give you what you want, Bhumika said calmly, eyes almost luminous. You can have your strength. You can turn the waters with your mortal hands. All of that can be yours, if you want it as much as you think you do. Bhumika's hand curled tighter around Priya's face, fanning her jaw, the nails sharp points of contact. But every time you come to me, the bond between us grows stronger. Every part of you becomes more mine, and every part of me is consumed in turn. We're changing and shifting together, sapling, and it is sweet. I don't deny the sweetness, but you should know I'll demand something in return for the privilege of power and the privilege of having me. Sapling. A cascade of memories swept over like drowning waters. The Yaksa with a mouth of thorns, the Yaksa kissing her, the Yaksa's nails cutting her cheek open, Priya's own hands carving open her own chest and offering all of herself, all that she had left, all that remained of her heart. Yaksa, she breathed, why do you wear my sister's face? I don't want you to speak to your sister, the Yaksa said simply, smiling with Bhumika's mouth, or something that resembled Bhumika's mouth. Even as Priya watched, the teeth grew too pearly, too sharp, the lips as bruised and curled as petals. I want you to speak to me. All this time, the first time she reached Bhumika in the Sangam, the moment she'd almost turned back to Ahiranya, and then seen Bhumika and changed her mind. All this time. Dread pulled in her stomach and worked its way through her, turning her blood to ice. Bhumika. Had she spoken to Bhumika at all, in truth, since she had left Ahiranya? What had happened to her sister, to everyone she'd left behind? The horror stroked fingers up along her spine, lies upon lies. Could she believe anything she had seen in the Sangam? Could she trust herself if she couldn't even recognize that her sister was not her sister? Priya tried to move, tried to rise, and felt the Yaksa's grip tighten further. You want to win. You want to kill those who stand against you. The Yaksa was smiling, luminous in the haze of starlight. Then we must work together. Your flesh, my strength. My flesh, Priya repeated. Your flesh, the Yaksa agreed sweetly. Her nail traced Priya's cheek. A hot shadow of pain followed it. My strength. Last time when I thought you were... Priya paused, gathering her words. When I thought you were my sister. When I thought you were as human as I am. When I did not know you were a Yaksa with all that entails. My body went strange. I went strange. I thought it was my own weakness. Not weakness, the Yaksa murmured. Little bud, tell me, what is worship? Hollowing, Priya whispered. And what is power? Priya said nothing to this. Power could be many things. When she thought of it, she thought of Bhumika tiredly working to hold all the shards of Ahiranya together, of Malini walking on a knife's edge, taking Priya's power to bolster her own, and Priya letting her. I don't know, she said, feeling utterly small in the Yaksa's hands. Sapling, the Yaksa said tenderly, You are an elder. You must know that power is a magic like any other. It demands sacrifice. Sacrifice. The water swirled around them, and the Yax's face continued to change. Flesh to wood, hair to vines, the eyelids lush with lichen. If I say no, Priya asked, will you let me drown? Ah, the Yax's fingernail traced her jaw again, possessive. No. Death isn't so bad, sapling. I'd keep you even then. A fine skin you'd make. A fine shell with good bones. But no, I want you as you are, living. But this battle will be lost, and many will die if you refuse me. The Yaksa leaned in closer, its hair and a cloak around them, vine and darkness. I do not care if mortals die, said the Yaksa. Not these mortals, but you do. She didn't care about that damn Ashutosh or Ramesh or any of the other soldiers, even if she didn't want them dead. Didn't care. But she thought of Sima and of Malini, of Lady Razia and Prince Rao, and said, what does it mean? What price must my flesh pay when I am already hollow for you? You gave something away that is mine, said the Yaksa. There was a reverberance, a great drumbeat that made the eternity of the Sangam rock, and Priya's own shadow form fractured into wisps that drew together again with shocking snap as the Yaksa snarled and held her skull still. You have no more time, little one, but you must get it back for me. Promise. A promise to a Yaksa, a vow that couldn't be broken. Priya couldn't feel her racing heart or tight lungs, but she felt fear. The kind of fear that doesn't need a body to give it shape. She thought of hollowness and magic. She thought of Sima on the bank of the river waiting for her, of Malini staring at her with want that was deeper than deathless waters, of real water that surrounded her, heavy and thick with blood, and the people caught inside it. Distantly she felt her body calling her home. I will, she said. It felt like a mistake, even as she said it, and yet it was also the only choice she could make. The only one. I vow it, Yaksa. The Yaksa's eyes glowed in brilliant vermilion. Hands pressed Priya beneath the 3 rivers of the Sangam. She breathed in one terrible breath that hollowed her lungs with cosmic waters. As she was full, whole, changed, she was rearing up out of the Vary. She spat water, bared her teeth in a howling laugh, and threw up her hands, taking the silt beneath up with her. She felt the water rising with the earth, felt it as Ramesh scrambled onto the island, sweating and bleeding, Prince Ashutosh in his arms. Felt it as the tree above them split and unfurled and wound itself into a new shape, a shield, a carapace. She felt it as the waters parted around her, and the roots she'd drawn up from the earth shaped a high bridge, open now, a path that Rao and Narayan's men could take directly to the flank of Chandra's waiting forces. They could do exactly what she'd promised. Malini would not fall. But the water, she could not hold every mote of it steady forever. So she did the only thing she could. She let it go and sent it where it would do the most good to her. She saw everything in pieces. The men on the opposite bank collapsing, snared by the ground around them, the water roiling toward them faster and faster, all of its weight driven by nature and by her unnatural hand, the water hitting the bank with a roar, and the beast swallowing them whole, as wind whipped her hair and her magic howled through her, fiery thorns in her blood, her bones. She heard screams. The Yaksa's voice, a croon that rose in her skull like a song, drawing them out. Good, sapling. Good, just so. Good, Priya thought nonsensically in turn. Good, it's done. And then she let her eyes close and her body fell once more.